The cargo transport arrived at Nexus Station 3 days before the practical examination. Katie watched through the observation deck windows as the massive ship docked with the station's cargo bay. The transport was unlike anything she had seen before, with thick armor plating and warning symbols from dozens of different species covering its hull. Even from a distance, she could see that this was a ship designed to carry dangerous cargo. Professor Veltar had announced the practical examination. During their regular xenobiology lecture, the class would observe live specimens from various hostile environments across the galaxy. Students would analyze hunting behaviors, feeding patterns, and survival adaptations of creatures that most civilizations considered too dangerous to study up close. Katie felt excited about the opportunity, while her classmates seemed increasingly nervous as the professor provided more details. The specimens include predators from ice worlds, desert planets, and deep ocean environments, Professor Veltar had explained. You will observe their behaviors in controlled settings and write detailed reports on their biological adaptations. This examination represents 30% of your final grade. Zix had been unusually quiet since the announcement. Katie found her roommate sitting on her sleeping shelf, staring at the wall with all 4 arms wrapped around her thin body. The Valorian's wings were completely still, which Katie had learned meant she was deeply worried about something. "Are you okay about the practical exam?" Katie asked. Zix's compound eyes focused on her. "You do not understand what Professor Veltar is bringing to the station. These are not ordinary predators, Katie. Some of these creatures come from worlds that have been abandoned by entire civilizations. How bad can they be? They'll be in secure containment, right? One of the specimens is from the Void Reaches." Katie had heard other students mention the Void Reaches in whispered conversations. It was a region of space that even the bravest galactic explorers avoided. The few expeditions that had returned from the Void Reaches brought back stories of creatures that defied normal biological understanding. Most species believed the region was cursed or protected by malevolent forces. What kind of creature lives in the Void Reaches? Zix's wings began to buzz softly. They are called nightmare stalkers. They are apex predators that hunt using psychological warfare. The creatures can project fear directly into the minds of their prey. Entire military units have been found catatonic after encountering a single nightmare stalker. Katie felt a chill run down her spine, but also a surge of scientific curiosity. A predator that used psychological attacks rather than physical force was unlike anything in Earth's fossil record. The evolutionary pressures that would create such a creature must have been extraordinary. She wondered what kind of environment would favor mental attacks over claws and teeth. The next day, Professor Veltar gathered the advanced xenobiology class in the main lecture hall. 200 students from 23 different species filled the tiered seating arrangement. Katie noticed that even the typically confident Corvallan warriors looked uneasy. The wolf-like beings kept scanning the room as if expecting an attack. Several Zenthari had changed their skin color to muted grays, which Katie had learned indicated extreme stress. The cargo transport has delivered specimens from 12 different hostile environments, Professor Veltar announced. Each creature represents a unique evolutionary solution to survival in extreme conditions. You will observe these beings in the xenobiology arena, where they will be contained behind reinforced barriers designed to hold the most dangerous life forms known to galactic science. A Corvallan student raised one clawed hand. "Professor, what? Security measures are in place if containment fails. The arena has multiple backup systems, including neural dampening fields, energy barriers, and emergency stasis projectors." Additionally, the station's security forces will be present during all observations. There is no possibility of the specimens escaping. Katie noticed that Professor Veltar's own body language suggested he was not entirely confident about the security measures. The reptilian being's scales had shifted to a darker shade of green, and his independent eyes kept moving restlessly around the room. Even their instructor seemed nervous about what was coming. Captain Murphy found Katie in the cafeteria that evening. The human liaison officer sat down across from her with a serious expression on his weathered face. Katie could tell he had something important to discuss. "I've been reading the manifest for the specimens arriving tomorrow," Captain Murphy said quietly. "Katie, you need to be especially careful during this practical exam." "Why?" "Professor Veltar said the security systems can handle anything." "The problem isn't the security systems. The problem is that one of these creatures specifically targets species that show psychological vulnerability. Humans have never encountered a nightmare stalker before, so we don't know how you'll react." Captain Murphy explained that nightmare stalkers were ambush predators that relied on paralyzing their prey with projected terror. The creatures could somehow sense the fear responses of other beings and amplify those emotions until the prey became completely helpless. Most galactic species had evolved specific behavioral patterns when encountering such predators, but humans had no such evolutionary programming. What happens to species that don't have the right behavioral responses? We don't know. Most species either freeze in terror or flee immediately when they encounter a nightmare stalker. The few beings that have survived close encounters describe feeling overwhelming dread that made rational thought impossible. Katie felt worried but also fascinated. Earth had produced predators that used various forms of psychological intimidation, but nothing that could directly manipulate the emotions of other species. She wondered if human brains might be immune to such attacks, or if they would be even more vulnerable than other beings. The day of the practical examination arrived with unusual activity throughout the station. Security personnel from multiple species patrolled the corridors leading to the xenobiology arena. Katie noticed that many regular students were avoiding the academic sector entirely. Even the cafeteria staff seemed nervous as they served breakfast. To the advanced xenobiology class. Katie met Zix outside their dormitory, and they walked together toward the arena. The Valorian's wings were buzzing constantly, and she kept checking over her shoulder as if something might be following them. Other students moved in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about the creatures they were about to observe. "I have been reading about nightmare stalkers all night," Zix said as they entered the academic corridor. "They are not just predators, Katie. They are something else entirely. Some xenobiologists believe they may have originally been created as biological weapons during an ancient war." "Created? You mean they're artificial?" "No one knows for certain. The creatures reproduce naturally, but their abilities seem too specialized to have evolved without intervention. They can sense the specific fear responses of dozens of different species as if they were programmed with that knowledge." The xenobiology arena was located in the center of the station's academic section. It was a massive circular chamber with tiered seating surrounding a central observation area. The arena floor was 50 meters across with transparent aluminum barriers that could withstand plasma cannon fire. Multiple projection systems allowed students to observe creatures from various angles while maintaining safe distances. Professor Veltar stood at the instructor's podium checking data tablets and communicating with security personnel. The reptilian being's scales were now almost black with stress, and his movements seemed more jerky than usual. Katie had never seen their professor so nervous about anything. Students filed into the arena, seating with beings from similar species grouping together. Katie noticed that she was one of only 3 humans present. The other 2 were graduate students who had arrived on an earlier transport. She felt isolated, sitting in the section designated for oxygen-breathing bipeds, while Zix took a spot in the insectoid section. Security officers from the Galactic Patrol took positions around the arena. These were professional soldiers trained to handle the most dangerous situations in known space. Katie noticed that even these experienced warriors seemed tense about what they were about to observe. Their weapons were powered up and their armor systems showed active status indicators. "Students, please take your assigned seats," Professor Veltar announced. "We will begin with specimens from lower threat categories and progress to more dangerous creatures. Remember that you are here to observe and learn, not to test the containment systems." The first several creatures were impressive, but relatively normal predators from various high-gravity or extreme temperature worlds. Katie took detailed notes on their hunting behaviors and physical adaptations. The students gradually relaxed as they observed these specimens safely contained behind the barriers. Then Professor Veltar announced that they would observe the final specimen. The arena lighting dimmed and additional security personnel entered the chamber. Katie felt the tension level increase dramatically as every being in the arena prepared for something unprecedented. The containment field shimmered and faded, revealing the creature that had terrorized 3 different civilizations. Katie's first impression was that the nightmare stalker seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The being stood 12 feet tall with a body that appeared solid but somehow shifted and wavered like smoke. Its form suggested a predatory mammal, but the details kept changing as if the creature existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The nightmare stalker had 6 limbs that could function as either arms or legs depending on its needs. Its head was elongated with features that reminded Katie of both a wolf and something much older and more primitive. The creature's eyes were the most disturbing feature because they seemed to look directly into the mind of whoever viewed them. They glowed with a pale blue light that pulsed in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. Professor Veltar's voice came through the arena's communication system, but Katie noticed it was shaking slightly. "Observe the creature's initial assessment. Behavior. Nightmare stalkers always survey their environment before beginning their hunting sequence." The creature moved around the containment area with fluid grace, testing the barriers with gentle touches of its shifting limbs. Katie watched fascinated as the being seemed to taste the air with organs she could not identify. The nightmare stalker was clearly intelligent and was methodically exploring its prison to understand the limitations placed upon it. Then the creature began its intimidation display. The change was immediate and overwhelming. Waves of pure terror seemed to radiate from the nightmare stalker, washing over the entire arena like a physical force. Katie felt her heart rate increase, but was amazed to realize she could still think clearly. Around her, the reaction was very different. Zix collapsed in her seat with all 4 arms wrapped around her head. The Valorian's wings were beating frantically, but produced no sound, as if the fear had stolen her ability to make noise. Other Valorians throughout the arena were exhibiting similar responses, with several falling from their seats entirely. The Corvalon warriors, who prided themselves on never showing fear, were backing away from the containment area. Their metallic fur was standing on end, and several were making low, whining sounds that Katie had never heard from their species before. Even these professional soldiers seemed helpless against the creature's psychological attack. The Zenthari had turned completely white and were pressed against the back walls of the arena as far from the creature as possible. Their normal communication through color changes had stopped entirely, as if the fear had overwhelmed their ability to express anything except terror. Professor Veltar was gripping his podium so tightly that his claws were leaving marks in the metal. The reptilian being's scales had gone completely black, and his independent eyes were moving wildly, as if he could not focus on anything. Katie could hear him trying to speak into his communicator, but his voice was barely a whisper. Security. Officers throughout the arena were backing toward the exits despite their training and experience. These were beings who had faced hostile armies and dangerous criminals, but none of them seemed able to function normally in the presence of the Nightmare Stalker. Several had drawn their weapons, but their hands were shaking too badly to aim properly. The creature seemed to feed on the terror it was generating. As the fear level in the arena increased, the Nightmare Stalker grew larger and more solid. Its intimidation display intensified until the waves of terror became almost visible distortions. In the air, students throughout the arena were collapsing or attempting to flee, but many seemed too paralyzed by fear to move. Katie realized she was probably the only being in the arena who was still thinking rationally. The creature's psychological attack was certainly impressive, but she found herself more curious than terrified. She wanted to understand how the Nightmare Stalker was projecting its influence and what biological mechanisms made such an ability possible. She stood up to get a better view of the creature's behavior during its intimidation display. This was exactly the kind of data she needed for her report on predatory adaptations. Katie pulled out her data tablet and began recording observations about the creature's physical changes as it generated its fear effects. The movement caught the Nightmare Stalker's attention. The creature stopped its general intimidation display and focused its glowing blue eyes directly on Katie. She felt the full force of its psychological attack directed specifically at her. The sensation was like having ice water poured directly into her brain, while something whispered that she was about to die in horrible ways. Katie blinked and tilted her head slightly as she studied the creature's focused attack behavior. The targeted fear projection was definitely more intense than the general display, but she found it manageable. She made a note on her tablet about the difference in intensity between area effect and focused psychological attacks. The Nightmare Stalker's eyes widened in what appeared to be confusion. The creature had clearly expected Katie to collapse or flee like every other being it had encountered. Instead, she was calmly taking notes and observing its behavior with scientific interest. Katie took a step closer to the containment barrier to get a better view of the creature's facial structure. She was particularly interested in the organs around its eyes that seemed to be generating the fear effects. The biological implications were fascinating because no Earth predator had ever evolved anything similar. Something unprecedented happened. The Nightmare Stalker backed away from Katie's position. Its intimidation display faltered, and the waves of terror that had filled the arena began to weaken. The creature's form seemed less solid and more smoke-like, as if it was having difficulty maintaining its physical presence. Its glowing blue eyes showed an expression that Katie had never expected to see. The apex predator that had terrorized civilizations across the galaxy was afraid. The creature continued backing away until it reached the far side of its containment area. It pressed itself against the barrier as far from Katie as possible while making sounds that resembled whimpering. The Nightmare Stalker's entire body was trembling, and its eyes darted around the arena as if looking for escape routes. The change in the creature's behavior broke the spell of terror that had paralyzed everyone else. Students throughout the arena began to recover as the fear effects dissipated. Beings who had been catatonic with terror slowly sat up and looked around in confusion. Even Professor Veltar managed to straighten up and begin functioning again. The silence in the arena was complete. 200 students and dozens of security personnel stared in amazement at something that should have been impossible. The most feared predator in known space was cowering in the corner of its cage, while a human student calmly observed its behavior. Security Chief Marcus Stone was the first to recover his professional composure. The human officer activated the emergency containment protocols that immediately surrounded the nightmare stalker with additional energy barriers. The creature seemed relieved to have more barriers between itself and Katie. All students remain. "In your seats," Chief Stone announced through the arena's communication system. "We are implementing secure containment procedures and will begin evacuation in an orderly manner." Professor Veltar managed to find his voice, though it was still shaking. "The practical examination is concluded. Students will submit their reports based on observations made today. Classes are suspended until further notice." Katie looked around the arena and realized that every being present was staring at her. The expressions ranged from amazement to fear to something approaching worship. She felt uncomfortable with the attention and confused about what had happened. From her perspective, she had simply observed an interesting predator that used psychological rather than physical attacks. Zix slowly approached Katie's position, moving carefully, as if her roommate might suddenly become dangerous. The Valorians. Compound eyes reflected the arena lighting in patterns Katie had never seen before. "Katie, what did you do to that creature?" "I didn't do anything. I just watched it and took notes for my report." "You were not afraid. How is that possible?" Even the security officers were paralyzed by terror. Katie thought about the question seriously. She had definitely felt the creature's fear effects, but they had been more like an interesting sensation than something that prevented rational thought. Humans had encountered many frightening situations throughout their evolution and had learned to think through their fear rather than be controlled by it. I was curious about how it generated the fear effects. I wanted to understand the biological mechanisms involved. The answer seemed to disturb Zix even more than what had happened with the creature. The Valorian's wings began buzzing in patterns that Katie recognized as extreme anxiety. Security personnel surrounded Katie as they escorted everyone from the arena. She noticed that even the human officers seemed nervous around her now. "Captain." Murphy appeared at her side and guided her toward the exit while other students gave them a wide berth. "Katie, we need to talk about what just happened in there. I'm not sure what happened. The creature seemed afraid of me for some reason, but I don't understand why." News of Katie's encounter with the nightmare stalker spread throughout the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. Within 2 weeks, every major government and military organization in known space had heard about the human student who had made the galaxy's most feared predator retreat in terror. The implications of her simple act of scientific curiosity were reshaping interstellar politics in ways that no one could have predicted. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session on the neutral world of Harmony Prime to discuss humanity's status in galactic society. Representatives from 47 different species gathered to debate whether humans should be classified as a psychological warfare threat or embraced as protectors against psychic predators. The sessions were broadcast across the galaxy and watched by billions of beings. Katie found herself at the center of debates she had never wanted to join. She received invitation after invitation to testify before government committees to speak at academic conferences and to lead expeditions into dangerous regions of space. Every message promised fame, fortune, or the opportunity to serve the greater good, but all of them meant abandoning her simple dream of studying alien biology. Captain Murphy brought her regular updates about the political developments. The human liaison officer seemed as overwhelmed as Katie by the rapid changes in humanity's galactic status. 3 different species have formally requested human protection services, he reported during one of their daily meetings. The Altarians want humans to help them reclaim mining worlds that were abandoned due to psychic predator infestations. The Centauri Republic is offering exclusive trade agreements in exchange for human assistance with their quarantined systems. What about the species that are afraid of us? 7 governments have filed formal complaints claiming that humans represent an unacceptable psychological warfare threat. They want restrictions placed on human expansion and mandatory psychological evaluations for all human citizens traveling in their space. The divide in galactic opinion was becoming increasingly sharp. Species that had suffered from psychic predator attacks saw humans as potential saviors who could help them reclaim lost territories and protect vulnerable populations. Other species viewed human psychological resistance as a threatening unknown that could be weaponized against them. Dr. Carter continued his research into human psychological capabilities while the political storm raged around them. His findings suggested that Katie's response to the nightmare stalker was representative of broader human traits rather than a unique individual characteristic. We've tested 50 human volunteers with recordings of various psychic predator attacks, he explained to Katie during one of their research sessions. While individual responses vary, all humans show significantly greater resistance to fear-based mental manipulation than other galactic species. So any human could do what I did. With proper training and preparation, probably yes. Humans seem naturally equipped to function rationally under psychological pressure that would incapacitate most other beings. The research data was being carefully guarded, but rumors about its implications were already spreading. Several military organizations were quietly recruiting human personnel for classified projects involving psychic threats. The unofficial human mercenary market was booming as species sought protection from creatures they could not handle themselves. Katie struggled with the moral implications of her newfound status. She had never intended to become a symbol of human superiority or a weapon against alien predators. Her scientific curiosity had accidentally revealed capabilities that could be used to help or harm depending on how they were applied. Zix remained her closest friend, but their relationship had changed in subtle ways since the arena incident. The Valorian still sought out Katie's company, but there was a new formality in their interactions that had not existed before. "You represent something larger than yourself now," Zix explained when Katie asked about the change. "When I speak with you, I am not just talking to my roommate. I am interacting with the human who defeated a nightmare stalker through simple fearlessness. I wish everyone would stop calling it a defeat. I just observed the creature scientifically. That is exactly what makes it so remarkable. You faced the galaxy's ultimate predator, and your response was curiosity rather than terror. Most species cannot comprehend such psychological strength." Professor Veltar offered Katie an opportunity that seemed perfect for her interests and values. The reptilian xenobiologist proposed establishing a new research program focused on understanding psychic predator behavior and developing humane methods for managing dangerous creatures. Rather than using human psychological resistance as a weapon, we could use it as a tool for scientific understanding, Professor Veltar explained. Your unique capabilities could help us study creatures that have been impossible to research safely. The proposal appealed to Katie because it would allow her to pursue her scientific interests while potentially helping species threatened by psychic predators. However, she realized that accepting would commit her to a very different life than she had originally planned. Captain Murphy advised her to consider the broader implications of whatever choice she made. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy would be partly shaped by how their most famous representative chose to use her abilities. If you focus on scientific research and protection rather than military applications, it could establish humans as a force for knowledge and stability rather than warfare, he suggested. Katie spent weeks considering her options while the galactic political situation continued to evolve around her. Some species were already implementing policies based on assumptions about human psychological capabilities. Others were developing new defense strategies to counter potential human psychological warfare tactics. The decision became easier when she received a message from a group of students representing multiple species who had remained at Nexus Station. Despite the controversy, they had formed an informal study group focused on interspecies psychology and wanted Katie to help lead their research. We believe that understanding different psychological responses could help all species work together more effectively, their message explained. Your experience with the Nightmare Stalker demonstrated that diversity of thought and reaction can be a strength rather than a weakness. Katie realized that this represented exactly the kind of future she wanted to help create. Rather than becoming a weapon or a tool for others to use, she could be part of building better understanding between species with different psychological capabilities. She announced her decision during a galaxy-wide broadcast that was watched by more beings than any single event in recorded history. Standing in the same arena where she had faced the Nightmare Stalker, Katie addressed the fears and hopes that her encounter had generated. I never intended to frighten anyone or prove human superiority over other species. I was simply curious about how an unusual predator had evolved its capabilities. That curiosity led to an unexpected discovery about the value of different psychological approaches to fear and danger. Katie proposed establishing the Interspecies Psychological Research Institute at Nexus Station with herself as the first director. The institute would study how different species processed fear, courage, and other emotions, with the goal of helping all beings understand and support each other more effectively. Humans may be naturally resistant to certain psychic attacks, but every species has psychological strengths that others lack. By studying these differences, we can help create a galaxy where diversity is seen as protection rather than threat. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Governments that had been considering restrictions on human activities instead offered funding for the new research institute. Species that had feared human psychological capabilities began to see them as potentially beneficial for mutual understanding. Within 6 months, the institute was operational with researchers from 30 different species working together to understand the psychological ecology of galactic civilization. Katie found herself leading exactly the kind of interdisciplinary research she had always dreamed about, but on a scale she had never imagined possible. The Nightmare Stalker that had started everything was relocated to a specialized research facility where it could be studied safely. Ironically, the creature became much more manageable once researchers understood that its psychological attacks could be neutralized by beings who approached it with curiosity rather than fear. 2 years after the arena incident, Katie stood before another mixed-species audience, but this time the atmosphere was celebration rather than crisis. The Institute had successfully helped 3 different species reclaim worlds that had been abandoned due to psychic predator problems. More importantly, they had developed new models for interspecies cooperation based on complementary psychological strengths. We learned that the galaxy's greatest threats can become manageable when different species work together using their unique capabilities. Katie told the assembled researchers and diplomats. Humans may not fear psychic predators, but we still need Valorian analytical skills, Corvallan tactical expertise, and Zenthari communication abilities to achieve our goals. Katie Mills pressed her face against the transport window and watched the massive space station grow larger as they approached. The Nexus Educational Station looked like a giant metal flower floating in space, with its 12 arms reaching out. From the central hub, each arm held dormitories and classrooms for different species from across the galaxy. Katie had dreamed of this moment for 3 years since she first heard about the exchange program. The transport pilot was a blue-skinned Altarian who kept glancing at Katie through his rear mirror. She had gotten used to the stares during her journey from Earth. Humans were still new to the galactic community, and most aliens found them strange. Some found them frightening, though Katie never understood why. She was just 19 years old and studying xenobiology at the University of New Angeles. The chance to study alien life forms up close was everything she had ever wanted. The docking bay was enormous and filled with ships from dozens of different worlds. Katie grabbed her single bag and followed the other passengers off the transport. The station's artificial gravity felt exactly like Earth's, which was a relief after the strange, weightless feeling during the jump through hyperspace. The air smelled clean, with a slight metallic taste that reminded her of a chemistry lab. A tall, reptilian being approached her group. He stood nearly 8 feet tall with green scales that shimmered under the station's lights. His eyes were bright yellow and moved independently like a chameleon's. When he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel mixed with wind. Welcome to Nexus Station. I am Professor Veltar, and I will be your xenobiology instructor. Please follow me to orientation. Katie walked behind the professor along with 40 other new students. She was the only human in the group. The others included insect-like Valorians with compound eyes that reflected light like jewels. There were several Corvallan warriors who looked like upright wolves with metallic fur. A few Zenthari moved on multiple legs and communicated through color changes on their skin. Katie tried not to stare, but everything was fascinating. The orientation hall was massive, with seating arranged for different body types. Katie found a spot designed for humanoid species and sat down. A Valorian student sat next to her. The insect being was about her height, but much thinner, with 4 arms and wings that buzzed softly when nervous. I am called Zix, the Valorian said in perfect English. You are the human student, correct? Yes, I'm Katie. Nice to meet you. Zix's compound eyes studied her carefully. I have heard much about your species. Is it true that humans come from a death world? Katie laughed. Earth isn't that dangerous. We just have a lot of different environments and some tough animals. The Galactic database lists Earth as having more apex predators per continent than any known world. It also mentions that humans developed persistence hunting and can run for days without stopping. Well, we can run marathons, but I wouldn't say days, Katie said, though she was starting to understand why other species might find humans intimidating. Professor Veltar began the orientation by explaining the station's layout and rules. The Nexus held 3,000 students from 47 different species. Classes were taught in Standard Galactic, but all students had translation implants to help with complex scientific terms. The station had 12 different atmospheric zones to accommodate various breathing requirements. Humans were assigned to Zone 7, along with other oxygen-breathing species. The purpose of this station is to foster understanding between species. Through shared learning, Professor Veltar explained. You will study alongside beings whose worlds and cultures are completely different from your own. Some of you may find this challenging. Remember that diversity of thought leads to better solutions. After orientation, Katie followed Zix to the dormitory section of Zone 7. Their room was simple, with 2 beds and desks arranged for different body types. Zix's bed was more like a shelf built into the wall where Valorians preferred to sleep. Katie's bed was standard humanoid design with soft padding. "I should warn you," Zix said while unpacking crystalline data storage devices, "many students are nervous about having a human on the station." "Why? What did humans ever do to them?" "It is not what humans did. It is what humans are capable of doing. Your species has a reputation." Katie sat on her bed feeling confused and a little hurt. "What kind of reputation?" Zix's wings buzzed more rapidly. "Humans are known as psychological warfare specialists. During the border wars with the hegemony, your people defeated enemies without firing a single shot. There are stories of human negotiators who could make warrior species surrender just by talking to them. Some species believe humans can control minds." "That's ridiculous. We can't control minds." "Perhaps not directly, but humans seem to understand how other species think in ways that make them very effective at persuasion and intimidation. Even species that have never met humans have heard the stories." Over the next few weeks, Katie settled into station life and her classes. She excelled in xenobiology and found Professor Veltar to be an excellent teacher, despite his intimidating appearance. The professor seemed genuinely interested in her perspectives on alien life forms. Katie discovered that her human viewpoint often led to insights that other students missed. The social aspects of station life were more difficult. Students from most species kept their distance from Katie. When she entered the cafeteria, conversations would stop and beings would find reasons to sit at different tables. A few brave students would ask her questions about Earth or human culture, but most seemed afraid of her. Katie tried to understand their fear, but it made no sense to her. She was just a student interested in learning about alien biology. She had never hurt anyone and had no interest in psychological warfare or whatever reputation humans supposedly had. She was polite and friendly, but that seemed to make some students even more nervous. Zix became her closest friend on the station. The Valorian explained that her species valued directness and found human communication styles refreshing compared to the complex social hierarchies of other species. Zix also helped Katie understand the subtle ways different beings communicated fear or aggression through body language and biochemical signals. "Humans do not display standard fear responses," Zix observed one evening while they studied together. "When most species encounter something dangerous, their bodies release specific pheromones and their posture changes in predictable ways. Humans show very different patterns. How do we show fear differently? You often become more focused rather than less. Other species freeze or flee, but humans frequently move toward danger to investigate. This behavior appears predatory to many beings." Katie thought about this while reading about various alien ecosystems. She realized that what humans considered normal curiosity might seem threatening to species that had evolved different survival strategies. On Earth, humans had learned to study dangerous animals and environments as a way to understand and overcome threats. Other species might have evolved to simply avoid anything dangerous. Captain Jake Murphy was the human liaison officer on the station. He stopped by Katie's dormitory one evening to check on how she was adjusting. Captain Murphy was in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. He had served on Nexus Station for 8 years and understood the challenges human students faced. The isolation gets easier, he told Katie. Most species need time to understand that humans aren't the monsters they've heard about in stories. Why do they tell such stories about us? Fear of the unknown, mostly. Humans solved problems during the border wars using methods other species hadn't considered. We negotiated peace treaties by understanding what each side really wanted rather than what they claimed to want. To species that communicate more directly, this seemed like mind control or trickery. Captain Murphy explained that human psychology was genuinely different from most galactic species. Humans had evolved complex social structures that required understanding multiple perspectives simultaneously. This ability to see situations from different viewpoints made humans excellent diplomats and negotiators, but also made them seem unpredictable to other beings. Give them time, Katie. Once they get to know you, they'll realize you're not some psychological warfare expert. You're just a curious student who wants to learn about their worlds. As her first month ended, Katie felt more confident about her studies, even though the social situation remained challenging. Professor Veltar announced that the advanced xenobiology class would soon have a special practical examination involving live specimens from various dangerous worlds. Katie was excited about the opportunity to observe alien predators up close. She had no idea that this practical exam would change everything. The silence in the training bay stretched like a held breath. Jake stood over Commander Zexthul's motionless form, his right hand still clenched in a fist and his chest rising and falling with adrenaline. The reptilian instructor lay crumpled against the broken training equipment, green blood trickling from his mouth where his jaw hung at an unnatural angle. Lisa was the first to move. She stepped forward and grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him back from the fallen commander. Her grip was strong and her voice was steady, despite the shock in her eyes. "Jake, we need to go," she whispered. "Right now." But it was already too late. The training bay doors burst open and security personnel flooded in. They wore the black uniforms of Academy peacekeepers and carried stun weapons designed to drop any known species. Their leader was a tall ethereal with skin like silver mist and eyes that glowed with inner light. "Nobody moves," the ethereal commanded, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Secure the human who struck the instructor." Jake raised his hands slowly, his mind finally catching up to what he had done. He had struck an instructor, not just any instructor, but a decorated combat veteran who outweighed him by 100 pounds and had natural weapons that could cut through steel. The magnitude of his mistake hit him like a physical blow. Two peacekeepers moved toward him with restraint fields ready. Jake did not resist as they bound his hands behind his back with energy shackles that hummed against his wrists. The metal felt cold and final against his skin. Medical personnel rushed to Zexthul's side. The lead medic, a spider-like creature with multiple arms, ran scanners over the commander's broken jaw while making clicking sounds of concern. Jake watched as they carefully loaded the unconscious instructor onto a hover stretcher. "Cadet Murphy," the ethereal said, consulting a data pad, "you are under arrest for assault on a superior officer. You will be held in detention pending court. Martial proceedings?" Jake nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Around the training bay, the other cadets watched in stunned silence. The Megalons looked impressed despite themselves. The Vorthons seemed confused, as if they could not understand how such a small creature had generated so much force. The human cadets looked terrified. As the peacekeepers led him away, Jake caught Lisa's eye. She mouthed something that might have been "stay strong" before the doors closed between them. The detention cell was small and gray, with a narrow bunk and basic facilities. Jake sat on the hard mattress and stared at his hands. His right knuckles were swollen and scraped from contact with Zexthul's scales. He flexed his fingers and winced at the pain shooting up his arm. 3 days passed with nothing but meal deliveries and silence. Jake tried to exercise in the confined space, but his heart was not in it. He had thrown away everything he had worked for in a moment of anger. Earth would recall him in disgrace, and he would never get another chance to prove that humans belonged among the stars. On the 4th day, the cell door opened to admit Dr. Yilan, the Academy's chief medical officer. The ancient ethereal moved with careful grace, her misty form shifting slightly as she settled onto the small chair across from Jake's. "Bunk, how are you feeling, Cadet Murphy?" she asked, her voice carrying harmonics that made it sound like music. "Like an idiot," Jake replied honestly. Dr. Yilan made a sound that might have been laughter. "Interesting choice of words. Tell me, what were you thinking when you struck Commander Zexthul?" Jake considered lying or making excuses, but decided the truth could not make his situation worse. "I was thinking that I was tired of being called weak by someone who had never seen what humans can do when we stop holding back." "And were you holding back during your training?" The question surprised Jake. "Of course I was. We all were. The Academy has rules about excessive force and injury to other cadets. We were told to be careful not to hurt anyone by accident." Dr. Yilan leaned forward with what seemed like interest. "You believed you might accidentally injure cadets from species much larger and stronger than your own?" "Not the Megalons or Vorthons," Jake said. "But some of the others, yes. Lisa had to pull her punches during sparring sessions because she was afraid of really hurting someone." "Fascinating," Dr. Yilan murmured. "Tell me about your world, Cadet Murphy. What was it like growing up on Earth?" Jake found himself talking about things he had not thought about since arriving at the Academy. He described the Texas ranch where he had grown up, working from dawn to dusk in heat that would have killed most species. He talked about moving, hay bales that weighed more than he did, wrestling steers to the ground for medical treatment, and running miles across rough terrain to check on distant cattle. "Your gravity is higher than standard," Dr. Yilan observed. "About 20%. Heavier than here," Jake confirmed. "Makes everything feel light and floaty." "And your sun?" "Hotter and brighter than most worlds. We had to wear protection just to work outside during summer. Skin cancer was a real problem before genetic therapy." Dr. Yilan made notes on her datapad as Jake talked. She asked about human sports, human combat training, and human responses to injury and pain. Jake found himself describing football games where players continued playing with broken bones, boxing matches that lasted 15 rounds, and military exercises where soldiers carried 100-pound packs across desert terrain. "When Commander Zexthul insulted your species," Dr. Yilan said finally, "you responded with violence. This is unusual behavior for a species you describe as peaceful." Jake shook his head. "We're not peaceful. We're controlled. There's a difference. Humans can be the most violent species in the galaxy when we need to be, but we choose not to be, most of the time." "Why?" "Because we know what happens when we stop choosing," Jake said quietly. "We've had wars that killed millions. We've built weapons that could destroy our entire planet. We learned to control ourselves because the alternative was extinction." Dr. Yilan was quiet for a long moment, her glowing eyes fixed on Jake's face. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Commander Zexthul is recovering," she said. "His jaw was broken in 3 places. The force of your strike was equivalent to being hit by a mining tool. My medical scans show that you generated approximately 4,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Jake stared at her. That's impossible. Not for a human, apparently, Dr. Yeelan replied. Your bone density is nearly twice galactic standard. Your muscle fiber composition is unlike anything in our databases. Your cardiovascular system can deliver oxygen at rates that would be fatal to most species. She stood and moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. Your court. Marshall is scheduled for tomorrow, she said. I will be testifying about my medical findings. You might find the proceedings interesting. After she left, Jake lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since throwing the punch, he began to wonder if maybe he had not made as big a mistake as he thought. Maybe it was time for the galaxy to learn what humans were really capable of when someone finally pushed them too far. Outside his cell, he could hear the sounds of normal academy life continuing. Cadets moving through corridors, instructors shouting, orders, ships landing and taking off from the busy spaceport. Soon he would face judgment for his actions. But for the first time in days, Jake was not afraid of what that judgment might reveal.